Hello and welcome to today's BOC Group webinar. I am glad that you are all here. Today's topic of the webinar is ADOIT A3 Unboxed, Managing Ever-Changing Enterprise Architectures. So today we'll be having a look at the latest version of our enterprise architecture tool, ADOIT, and obviously version 8.3. Here are a few tips to allow you to follow the webinar more effectively. During the webinar, all participants are welcome to ask questions. There is a questions panel on the side of your screen. You're welcome to submit questions to us at any time. We will try to address them at the end of the webinar if we have time. If we don't have time to address them at the end, we will surely follow up with you over email and make sure to get to all those questions. The list of participants is anonymous, and the only participants which appear visible are the organizers. Last but not least, we will be recording this webinar, and we will be sending you the recording via an email, so you'll have the link to watch the webinar at any time. My name is Eugenio Lobo. I will be your host for today. I hope you're all feeling comfortable in this virtual meeting room that we have today. As an expert on today's topic, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Thomas Brennan. He will be basically walking us through the topics for today in terms of ADOIT A3. So welcome to Tom. Today we'll be looking at mainly an overview of the highlights and capabilities of ADOIT. So we'll be looking more specifically at our EA workflow. This is a new capability that we have introduced into ADOIT. We'll also see the extended functionality that the search function has. We'll be looking at some new reporting formats, and more specifically PDF-A. Also, A3 comes with an optimized user interface where we have implemented a new flat design. So we'll be having a look at that. And lastly, we'll look at the object tooltips, a new capability of ADOIT. Before we get started with the webinar, I would like to give you a brief overview into BOC's activities. BOC Group was founded in 1995 as a spin-off of the University of Vienna. Today it has more than 230 employees in 8 countries, and we sell our products and implementation projects in consulting and services in more than 50 countries. We are particularly proud of our almost 100,000 user community. These are users of our community edition. And with this, we have had more than 20 years experience in IT-based management domains. So we now have more than 35,000 installations of our commercial software in companies around the world. Our products from the BOC Management Office are primarily aimed at facilitating change in business and IT. We accomplish this by creating necessary visibility into your process architecture and enterprise architecture, and that helps you better understand and control change. The portfolio of our products includes Adonis, focused on business process management, our GRC module, focused on, of course, governance, risk, and compliance, and lastly, enterprise architecture with ADOIT. All of these products embrace a powerful common platform that allows users to model processes or architectures, run analysis and reports, assess risk, and more through a web-based approach. All of our tools are very highly flexible in terms of configuration, allowing us to do customer-specific customization for all of our clients. The BOC doesn't leave you alone to face all of your exciting challenges by yourself. This is why we provide consulting, training, and support to all of our customers to allow them to have a positive experience when using our products. Our international customers, as well as renowned analysts such as Forrester and Gartner, have become increasingly aware of us in the recent years, and they are positive testimony to the developments that we have made to date and also in the future. Feel free to take a few minutes after the webinar to browse through their respective reviews and reports, which are available on our website. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to my colleague Tom, who will be beginning with today's webinar.
Okay, thank you, Eugenio, for today's introduction. I would also like to welcome everyone to today's session. We're very happy to announce the release of the latest version of ADOIT in 2018. And today, we're going to take a look at some of the key innovations that have been wrapped up in this new release. So firstly, I want to take a look, just a quick overview of today's agenda. We're going to start by having a quick look at the new features and innovations that are available and to see how they relate to the various users, users of the web client, users of the standard application library, and also the ADOIT administrators. Then next up will be, again, just looking at the main features today, but looking at them directly in the tool, so directly in ADOIT. We're going to take an in-depth look at the new enterprise architecture workflow process and how the various stakeholders are involved, such as the architects and our typical contributor roles. We're going to take a look at how the user interface has slightly changed, just to be more kind of minimal and user-friendly, and see really what changes have been also made to the search and analysis capabilities, the reporting options, and as well as the new object tooltips for just getting a kind of a quick overview of an individual artifact. And then we'll finish up with just a quick recap of all of the latest new additions to ADOIT 8.3. Okay, so let's begin by taking a look at what's been added for all users and stakeholders of the ADOIT web client in particular. One of the biggest kind of functionality blocks that have been kind of made available as an add-on to the core functionality of ADOIT is the EA workflow, as I mentioned. So this also includes the control and release scenario, which can be added to the user profile of the stakeholders involved in the EA workflow process. So it just provides the users with kind of a quick overview of any of the artifacts that require some transition in the EA workflow or any action to be taken. And there's been some minor changes in the user interface of ADOIT, which we're going to see during the demo as well. For example, we have a new button now for opening the kind of model notebook information. Our navigation bar is always minimized now, so you only see what the menu options are when you hover over it. And by default, the Explorer now defaults to the Object Explorer as opposed to the Model Explorer as it is. So we also have additional changes now in how the various filters affect the repository. And for example, by default, the time filter is now automatically set to today's date or the current date when you open any scenario in the web client. And our property filters, which were available before, but they can now be set on specific scenarios. So that, for example, in the core design and documents scenario, maybe all available attributes can be shown in the objects notebook, whereas if you want to only share published content, the organization portal, you can just be more flexible in how you apply the various filters on the repository. So we've also extended the functionality around the search and analysis component, where you can be more specific now about what part of the repository you'd actually like to perform the search on. Again, we'll see that a little bit later. And for the PDF formats and for reporting, we've introduced some new styling, as well as for printing, and with all of the objects as well have that small pop-up window now for the object tooltips when you hover your mouse over an object, either in the graphical editor when you're looking at a read-only model and in the organization portal. So we just provide some pre-configured attribute information describing the object. And then lastly, just we can also now open any documents that have been already imported into the ADOIT database. There's just more options now as to how you can kind of open them documents that are attached to an object directly with a click in various locations in the tool. Okay, so users of the standard ADOIT application library are going to see that the biggest change really is in the graphical representation of all of the models and object icons, and how they are now presented in a more kind of flat design. So this was done again just to try and align the icons and the user interface with the rest of the software and to try to present a more kind of cleaner and minimal look, taking out the kind of little 3D effects that were there before on the graphical representations for the objects. We've also now included a cross-reference object in all model types and in all view modes. So the cross-reference is really used as more of a kind of a navigational aid in large model bases. So it's really kind of a dummy object with just a link to another model or object in the repository. And here as well, we've also extended the risk allocation. So that functionality has been extended so that risks can now be associated with many more objects and not only the IT asset, as was the case in previous versions of ADOIT. So this just basically broadens the scope of the risk management scenario and how that can be supported directly in the tool. And what's new for our ADOIT administrators? Well, their features are basically that we've increased the configuration possibilities from the EA workflow scenario to be able to assign users with the correct system roles. And I just want to mention as well here that with the EA workflow, the EA workflow will only be available in ADOIT if you extend your ADOIT license, as it's more of an optional add-on to the standard ADOIT package. But other configuration options in the administration toolkit are related to the object tooltips that pop up and what attributes are going to be visible in the pop-up window that appears, and also settings around, printing and reports, assigning the property filters to the various scenarios, and lots of other configuration options. But today we're going to focus on mainly on the enhancements that affect the typical user in the web client. Okay, so now we're going to just jump directly into the tool here and log on firstly as an architect. So we're going to just take a look at in the whole kind of live demo today, again, just looking at the new user interface, and we'll focus mainly on the EA workflow. We'll take a look at the various reports that can be generated now and what changes have happened in the search and analysis component, as well as the object tooltips. But I'm going to firstly just log in here as the architect to see what scenarios are now available for his or her user. We can see now there's an additional scenario that we didn't have before, which is the control and release scenario for the EA workflow. But we're going to firstly just jump into the usual design and document scenario here. So generally everything looks pretty much the same. We've kind of darkened the top bar across the top, and as I mentioned, the normal kind of sidebar here is minimized until you actually hover over it, and then you can see what each symbol represents and what part of the tool you need to switch to next. So that's minimized the whole time until you actually hover over it to open it up. In the past there was a button here to open and close the navigation bar, but that's been removed. Again, over here you've got your My Architecture artifacts, so nothing here has really changed. You still have the color-coded symbols here based on how up-to-date the information is, based on the threshold set in the administration toolkit. But if we just go to open up the Explorer, now you will see that by default, when you open up the Model and Object Explorer, it defaults now to the Object Explorer rather than to the Model Explorer, as you are typically kind of dealing and working with objects more so than with models. So again, it's just a kind of a minor change that existing users will have to get used to. But again, you can just switch between models and objects here in the top left-hand corner, but it just defaults to the Object Explorer first of all. As I mentioned, there's some new kind of filter configurations as well, and by default, when you log in, you can see here in our drop-down list, we've got a variant filter, a time filter, and a state filter. But the time filter here is set to show today's date. So that's applied on the repository. So basically, that means that only objects that are valid on the current date will be shown here in the repository when you go searching for some artifacts here. Obviously, you can just cancel that off, and then you can close it, and that filter won't be applied anymore, but it just defaults to the current date when you log on first of all. So let's just change now to the Model Explorer and take a quick look at the Meta model, which gives us an overview of all of the various object representations which have changed into the kind of more flat design, as I mentioned. So everything is the same, all of the layers are the same, all of the various architecture objects that we have available on the various layers are still there. It's just the graphical representation has changed. And as I mentioned with the risk management scenario, we can now associate risks to the various other objects associated in or that we have in the repository, rather than only being able to assign them to the IT asset, which was previously the case. So like we always say, not every relation is visible here on the kind of meta model picture, but it just gives you an overview of how the new objects look here directly in the tool. So it's just the more kind of flat design that we have there. Okay, so one thing I also mentioned was the models notebook. So in the past we had an option here to open up the model properties, which gives you a kind of just some general information about the model as well as some system attributes. But that button has now moved over here to the right hand side to open up the properties of the model. So we can just provide a name, some keywords, description and comments, but it also holds the system attributes, so you can see who the author is, when it was created, who was the last editor, and when was the model changed. So it's just existing users maybe looking and being confused when they don't see the model properties here. It's just the button has moved over here to the right hand side. Okay, so just for now, I'm just going to log back out of ADOIT for a moment and just go back to the slides. Obviously, there wasn't only kind of graphical and user interface changes that happened as part of this release, but there was also some kind of serious new core functionality added. As I mentioned, one of the core features of the release is the EA workflow, which is explained here on this slide at a kind of a high level. So the new workflow just allows you to control the versioning and the release of all objects in the repository. When any new or released object needs to be changed, so if it's in a release state, you can just put it through the release workflow and submit any change for review before it's then checked by the architect, and it can then be then released or rejected. So the main contributors the main stakeholders, sorry, in the EA workflow process are the contributors who can make changes and then submit objects for review. And the architects can basically execute all transitions that you can see here, but their main responsibility is rejecting or releasing objects following any changes that have been made by the contributors. So the states that the object can have are draft, under review, released, or to be deleted. So you can see when maybe an object isn't required anymore, it can be proposed to be deleted. It remains in that state though until the architect actually goes in and finally removes the object from the repository. So it could be the case that it won't actually be deleted, it could be maintained for a longer period of time. Also, if any objects needs to have an attribute changed, or maybe the kind of decommission date needs to be set on a released object, then a copy of that object is created in a draft state before then moving through the review process once again. So there's a number of different scenarios that we can look at here and that we can support, but we're going to just have a look at a couple today live in ADOIT. So again, I'm just going to switch back, and again, as I mentioned here, just the availability of this EA workflow really depends on your product license. It's not available as standard. Okay, so back to ADOIT. This time we're going to log in as a contributor. So as I mentioned, the contributor can submit objects for review following a change or following any new object that's created, but they can also create draft objects of already released ones to make any necessary changes. So here again, just with the contributor, as is usual, he's got kind of reduced access, so we don't have the govern and manage scenario. He does have the design and document and the control and release scenarios available here. So again, just we get an overview of the artifacts that my own owner user is responsible for. So he's allocated as a responsible person for this list of applications. But you can see here with the quick links for creating content in ADOIT, we can see some of them are grayed out because his kind of access rights on the repository have been reduced based on his contributor access there as well. So basically we want to go through the example here that a contributor needs to make a change to a specific object. So let's just say that a single application, we want to declare that some responsibilities have changed. So we need to actually declare that or document that change here in the tool. So we can firstly just search the repository for our business partner application. So right away we can see here in the Object Explorer that our business partner application is currently in a release state. So you also see once the EA workflow is configured that we have a column here to show what state the current objects are in. So we can hover over it here and you see the little tick mark means the business partner application is in a release state, and it's obviously in a read-only view. So the little red padlock icon indicates that it's here in read only. So we can just confirm that when we open up the notebook. We can see that here I can't make any changes, so the editing button is grayed out. In the change history chapter of the object here, we can see that it's currently in a release state and the current version number. So if we want to actually then make a change to an already released object, we just come up here to this drop-down menu where we can see what transitions are available for my user here. So I can either submit it for deletion, make a change, or set the end of life date. But in this case, we just want to make a change. And once you decide to make a change, ADOIT will prompt you to actually enter in a note to see what's actually happening as part of the transition. So let's just add respond. Oh, spell check just showing me I've spelled something wrong here. And needs to be included in the documentation. Okay, so once you add your note, as I said, all of the notes that are entered here, they're recorded in that change history chapter that we just had a look at for the object, and that's mainly for kind of audit trail purposes to actually see who performed the change and what was the reason for the change. So now, this time if we look in our Object Explorer, we now see that there's two versions of our business partner application. So we have one in a release state and one currently in a draft state. So the main change we want to do here now, so on the right hand side you'll notice that the kind of notebook for the draft object has opened. So we can now make some changes, so it's in an editing mode. So in this case I'm going to reassign or change the responsibility here and assign my own owner user to be responsible for this application. So we need to add a stakeholder here, find my user from the list, and save the change here as well. Okay, and then we want to submit the application to review, so submit the object to review. When I do so, there's going to be some validation checks that are carried out here. So before any transition, the validation component also pops up here on the right hand side, and typically things that are being checked here is to make sure all mandatory attributes have been documented and to make sure an owner has been assigned for governance purposes. And again, we have the option here to add a little note on the transition to actually let the other stakeholders know what's happened as part of the transition. Okay, so once we click OK, the transitions should complete. You get a completion message down the bottom right hand corner. And now if we actually switch back to the design and document portal for our own owner user, and if we refresh our dashboard here, we can now see that the business partner application is under my responsibility. So the final change still needs to be approved by the architect, but for now there's a business partner application here visible in my architecture artifacts because I've been assigned as the user. Okay, so that's the first scenario, is just making a change, seeing that once you make a change in the, if we just search again, here we can see now in the Explorer that we've got two versions of the business partner application. Because I've now submitted it to review, they are both locked for editing. So until the architect goes and either approves the change or rejects the change, nothing else can happen for either application. And only one draft version or one under review version of an object can be made available. So there will only ever be two versions, a released and then either a draft or an under review version of an object at any one time. Okay, so the next scenario that we want to look at is actually the scenario where maybe an application is being replaced and the old object needs to be deleted. So it could be the case that there's no longer any need for the application in the organization, so it can then be submitted for deletion. So in this case, we just need to find our partner system application. So we have our partner system application here, and we can straight away directly from the Explorer here realize that, okay, partner system has been replaced. We know that, so we can, in the release workflow, submit the object from deletion directly from the context menu here. So again, you can just add a comment on the transition, and now you will see the state icon change here to the little to be deleted icon. So this is also going to be visible for any other users of ADOIT, so they'll be able to see that maybe objects, the partner system object could be part of one of their models, or they may want to try and create some new references to it. So at least they're made aware before the object is finally deleted completely from the repository. They'll at least see that it's been submitted, which will be probably going to be deleted at a later point. So again, just at this point, I just want to mention that we have added the state filter again, which relates to the EA workflow. So I can just close the time filter first of all and turn on the state filter. So here we can decide what objects we want to see in our Explorer over here. If we want to see only draft objects, objects that are under review, or with the released, we can actually look at the extended view and we can see objects that have been released or objects that have been submitted for deletion. So maybe we turn on that and turn on the under review, apply that filter on our repository, and you can see here our object repository is now limited to only show objects that have been submitted for deletion, or here we've got the under review icon. So it's just a way of being able to see what objects are kind of have some action items associated, or objects that are already in the EA workflow process. Okay, so for the next scenario I want to just mention, I'm going to log out again as the contributor role and log back in as the architect again. So we'll switch back to our arc user. Okay, so we're now going to take a look at the control and release scenario. So with this scenario, you basically have one view of all of the architecture elements that are currently in the EA workflow process, and that requires some action. So similar to what we just did in applying the filter, you can see it in the Object Explorer, but this is just a more kind of a centralized view for the stakeholders who are involved in the EA workflow process to be able to log into the control and release scenario, and you get a quick overview of all of the objects that currently have some issues. So we can see here on the top right hand corner we also have some filters. So similar to the filters we can apply on the Object Explorer, we can apply the filter here directly to switch on and off which states you want to see here. So So obviously in this kind of demo environment, we only have a couple of elements currently in the EA workflow, but you can imagine how the filters would actually help you in a more real world scenario when you have lists and lists of objects that need your attention as your EA matures over time. So we're going to firstly look at our business partner application. So we can see here that it's been submitted, it's under review. So we can click over here to see what actions are possible. So the architect can either reject the change or release the change, but before you do that, you want to actually go in and check and see, okay, something has happened with the business partner application. Let's have a look inside. So again, we open up the notebook. We can see again it's in a locked state based on its EA workflow state of being under review. But to check what has actually changed or what the proposal is, we can take a look here in the change history chapter again. So firstly we see our state, it's under review, we've got the version number 2.01, and we can see all of the transitions that have happened up to now. So the one we just performed today was changing the responsible person. So we have the comment here that the responsibilities have changed and needs to be included in the documentation, and we can see that Owen has now been assigned as the new responsible. So this is just a good way of seeing what's changed over time. You also get a link here to the predecessor object, so your under review object is linked to the predecessor, so we can see the state here is released, and also open up some properties of that particular object. Yes, we can just basically see what's changed, who performed the change, and when it was done. And from here you can then decide to actually release or reject the change. So here we go, we can just release it here and say yes, everything is good. Okay, so everything's hunky-dory here, so we can now approve the change. Again, there's a validation check just from, again, kind of best practices principles to make sure everything is being documented as you need it. And now when we look back into our Object Explorer and search for our business partner, we now only have one version available. So once you release the version to replace the previously released object, the old one is deleted completely from the repository. So you see here the version number has changed and the transition that's been made as well. So we don't have any predecessor object now because it's been completely removed. There's no kind of archiving of objects similar to what can happen in our kind of business process management tool, Adonis MP. We can typically archive models, but that's more for audit trails of the actual models. But in here, once we release a new version of an object, then the previous one is removed from the repository. Okay, so in the fourth scenario we want to look at, if we just go back to our control and release dashboard, here we had our partner system application, which we can see has been submitted to be deleted. So again, it's here where the architect can decide, okay, I know for now I don't want to actually release this object, so you can reverse the transition and put the partner system application back into a release state. But if it's the case that, okay, yes, partner system is no longer needed by any of our other stakeholders, there could be the case that some legacy models or where the object is still required. But if you do need to finally remove the object, we can just select it here in the Explorer, and as normal from the Explorer, once you have the right privileges, you can delete the object completely from the repository. So that's it for those two. The last kind of scenario that I want to introduce is, it's more of a kind of a special EA workflow in terms of a more kind of complete enterprise process, and we've included it based on some feedback from our customers, and that is the ability to set the decommission or end of life date on an object. So it's a typical request. So I'm just going to jump back here to the design and document scenario, yeah, it's a typical request in terms of the EA workflow and what can kind of frequently happen. So we can actually perform this transition. Again, we'll just take a look at another context menu. So we're going to make the change here to our cache system application. And if we right click on the cache system, again, you've got the option here for what release workflow transitions are available, again, for this user and for this type of object in its current release state. So here we can go to set the end of life date. So again, it's more of a quick way to do things. It just opens up a pop-up window. We can say, okay, we're going to actually decommission this application earlier than we expected before, so we can change it from 2019 to 2018. We can click OK. If you want to add a comment, you can. Again, that's just for audit purposes. So once we do so, our notebook of this application pops up. So because I'm logged in as the architect, I've made the change to the end of life date. We can straight away submit it to review. Again, as normal, validation pops up. We can also enter a comment, but it's just a simple change, so I can straight away from here inside the notebook as the architect release the change as well. So you don't always have to go back to the control and release scenario. You can do things once you have the right privileges and directly in the notebook for making kind of quick changes to any of the objects that you have. Yeah, that's it really for the kind of EA workflow scenario. I'm just going to jump back to the slides just to give a quick recap on the EA workflow and the possible states and transitions. So again, just once a new object is created, you've got a draft state, then you submit the object to review. Once it's under review, it can either be released or rejected. So as I said here, once an object is released, the predecessor object is replaced and it will be deleted as well. So it's completely removed once an object under review is released. From the release date, either you can set the end of life date, which just is essentially a single change on the object, just on its decommission date, or if you need to make a change, then from the released object, you make a change, but when either of these two transitions happen, a new object copy is created and then linked to the previously released object that you have. And lastly, as we saw, you can then also propose that an object needs to be deleted, so submit it for deletion, and then it's up to the architect to finally decide whether or not they delete or not the object that they have. Okay, so just back to ADOIT again, just to run through some of the other features that we have. So directly from our cache system object here, we can go to generate a report. So the object report, here we can select it with the standard page layout. So with the reports, it's just going to generate a PDF here. We've added a new kind of styling to the title page here, so it's just a little bit different. You can also add your corporate identity here with your logo and your company address. So obviously we have just the normal ADOIT logo, but you can change that to the logo of your company. And here in the footer of the document, you've got, again, the corporate identity. You can see when the report was generated and by who. Also, the wider margins just really improve the kind of printing quality of all of the reports generated, and just the style has kind of been redesigned to make things easier to read and a bit clearer as well. So another feature within ADOIT is now the ability to generate any of the reports that you need in a PDF-A compliant format. So this ISO standard format is used for kind of archiving and for the long-term preservation of any kind of electronic documents. So this just ensures that anything that you need in the future, any document that you need, no matter, it'll always going to be accessible in the future no matter what kind of device or application you're using to display it. So this option to have a PDF-A format is, again, you can configure that in the administration toolkit for both reports and for printing. So this just ensures your kind of audit readiness in the future. Just back to the standard is going to protect the longevity of. So just close this report. For a second and back into the tool. Yeah, another area, as I mentioned in the beginning, where we have made some improvements is here in the search and analysis component or search and analysis portal. We've basically made some changes to the representation of the search results and added the ability to speed up the searches by reducing the scope of where you're actually applying the search to. So if we firstly just search for a term, you see here in the search results that the term is highlighted in yellow directly below in the search results. And if we open up the notebook for one of the objects here, the term is also highlighted directly in the notebook as well. So it just makes it easier to actually find the term that you're searching for. Another option, as I mentioned, is to restrict the scope of where you're searching. So when we applied the search term bank here, we're looking in all 34 elements where the term bank was found. But if we turn on our scope filter here, it pops up a dialog to say, okay, where in the repository do I want to apply the search? So we can hold, we can search the Model Explorer and also in the Object Explorer. Again, we'll go into the same, we go to one folder and click OK. We'll just do it on the models for now. So you can see that the scope there is reduced to only search in there's only 4 objects now remaining in the Model Explorer where we set the scope. So again, if we just can do it this time to select the EAM folder on the other side, again apply the scope, and you can see it's reduced down to only 30 being found. So if you're more specific about where you actually apply the search and where the search should happen, it will just then speed up the actual return of results from the repository. Here we can see in the search results underneath, we can see what where the object, if it's contained in an existing model. But we can now also select a column here to be visible to actually show the group path of where the object is stored in the repository as well. So if we just select the little checkbox here, so we can show the model name, which includes a column, and we can also show the group path here as well. So if we see the group path, it just adds an additional column here. And then if you click on the group path, it opens up the Explorer and finds that object directly for you. On top of that, we can now, we've added some additional export options in terms of exporting the results of either a tabular view in a model, or here in the search results that we have. So here in the export options, we can export to Excel either grouped or just looking at the current view, but we've included the table attributes. So for example, if you have some kind of list of attachments linked to a single object, in previous versions of ADOIT, the number of attachments linked to the object in the table, it was only just shown as a number in brackets, but now a row is given for each kind of row of the table attributes, and the columns are included as well. So the object name will also be repeated just for each row so that the table is clearer to read as well. Okay, so I'm now going to just log out as the architect, and we're going to just take a quick look at the organization portal. So the organization portal here, the best thing about it really is that you can provide your users with read-only access to some content without having to actually manage all of their kind of user accounts and usernames and passwords if you don't want to. You just need to provide access to this link. So here we have it on the login page. Basically with the organization portal, any kind of personalized dashboards and the other kind of complex functions are not included in the org portal. Typically users will be granted kind of access rights basically to this reporting board that you see here. We can also set a new kind of start model so that when the org portal opens, it will default to this start model, which I've set here to be the business capability model. So if we just zoom out a little bit here, And basically only content that is in a release state will be available in the organization portal as well. So the last kind of feature that I want to show you is the object tooltip. So when we hover over any of the objects here in the org portal, but also in the other scenarios when you open a read-only model, once you hover the mouse over the object, the little window you can see here pops up displaying some attribute information, which again is predefined by your administrator, and then only attributes that have been populated in the web client will be shown here as well. So if we look at the procurement, there's no kind of description added, so therefore the attribute doesn't pop up at all. And here we can see for human resources there was a responsible person, which is our architecture user. So again, you can just double click on the user and it opens up the notebook of the object that's related as well. So it's just kind of a quick way of navigating and viewing content without having to go open up the notebook and read, okay, description, change history, lifecycle information. You can have specific attributes visible just by hovering over an object in a read-only model. So it just makes the content just easier to consume for the readers. So here, as I mentioned in the org portal, you've got the reporting board, so you can generate any reports or views that you've been granted access to by the administrator. But you can also open up the Model and Object Explorer. Again, it defaults to the Object Explorer first of all. If we switch to models, we can just take a look at another example of an application architecture model here. And again, just for the applications, there are different object types, but they've got similar object tooltips and the attributes that are visible here as defined by the architect administration the administrator. Sorry, so I'm just going to jump. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the kind of demo. Back to recap. I think we've covered the EA workflow in enough detail. Again, just to mention that you've now seen in the tool how the kind of flat design looks and how it just blends into the more kind of modern interface of ADOIT. But the good thing is that the general look and feel and the main menu options have remained unchanged. Otherwise, with the search and analysis component, we've seen how you can speed up the searches by narrowing the scope of your search, and as well as the way the terms, as you can see here, are highlighted both in yellow in the results and also in any notebook that you subsequently open. With the reporting and printing, you can see that the way that the styling has changed with the new kind of title page as well as the corporate identity, and that you can now export your PDFs into the PDF-A format for the kind of long-term preservation of documents. And lastly, we have seen just how the object tooltips work. And yeah, as I said, this function is only available in the read-only models, both in the org portal and in the graphical editor. Okay, so just to finish up, my part, I just want to mention some of the other topics that we mentioned in the beginning. With the additional configuration options for the different global filters. So we've seen the time filter, but with the property filter, they can be predefined in the administration toolkit. For any document as well that has been uploaded into the ADOIT database, there's now more options available to actually open up the document with one click in different parts of the tool. Again, there's improvements in the graphical modeling that we didn't get to see, from drawing connectors to container objects, or actually moving objects that are grouped together in an aggregation, to being able to scroll around a larger model just by holding down the kind of space bar and using the left mouse button to navigate around the model, rather than using the kind of scrolling bars on the right hand side or at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, I mentioned the cross-references with the risk allocation as well, where we can now associate the risks with more than just the IT asset object. And there are also now more advanced authentication and synchronization possibilities through both kind of SAML as well, integrated with LDAP to support single sign-on and lots more as well. So that's really all from me today. I want to thank you again for your attending. I'm now going to pass you back to our host, Eugenio, who will wrap up today's webinar, and he'll also let you know how you can get in touch with us to find out more or to set up maybe a more in-depth tool demo. So thanks again, Eugenio.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for presenting us all of these interesting new features. So I will now give you an overlook at some of the upcoming events, but before that, if you're interested in finding out more about our latest version or having a live demo, feel free to contact us through our website or visiting the ADOIT TA3 page on our website where you can find out more. So now looking at our upcoming webinars and events. So we have a webinar called Getting Started with BPM. So this will be hosted on the 15th of February, where we will be giving you an introduction into how you can implement BPM in your company successfully using Adonis. We will have a similar webinar, but now focused on enterprise architecture on the 15th of March, where we will again take ADOIT and show you how to successfully implement ADOIT in your organization. Lastly, we will have a webinar on the 22nd of March. It's called Getting Started with ICS and Risk Management, where we will learn how to take risk management to the next level with our GRC module. These are the webinars that we have upcoming. Of course, there will be more webinars throughout the year, but these are just the ones that we have announced so far. We also have a section on our website called On-Demand Webinars. So this gives you access to our library of recorded webinars, which have already been held in the past. And so you can reference other topics that are interesting to you. All you have to do is register for any one of the webinars and you will receive a link to watch them. Also, don't forget that we have a 30-day free trial of our tool. So for a non-binding test run of our products, feel free to access the 30-day free trial of our tool ADOIT or our tool Adonis in the website, where you will get access for not only you but other colleagues to a web-based version of the professional tool. So feel free to check those out. If you have any questions at this moment, please feel free to submit them through the panel that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. So far, we have not received any questions. If we receive any right now in the next couple of minutes, we'll be sure to address them over email. So on behalf of Tom and myself, I hope you enjoyed the webinar. I was happy to see that so many of you attended. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter so that you can stay informed about our upcoming events or any interesting news. It also gives us great pleasure to receive feedback from you. So you will be receiving an email in the coming days asking your opinion about this webinar. Please help us out answering that survey, and we'll be happy to have your feedback. On behalf of Tom and myself, I wish you a pleasant rest of the day, and I hope to see you again in one of our webinars. Bye-bye.